Hello, and welcome to a game theory special. Many of my friends have been asking me, well, basically this question up here. Okay, I just saw Dune. Ramsey, please can you explain what the fuck just happened? And, I've got a lot of sympathy to this. It goes without saying, however, a couple of important points here. Big, fat, hairy, incredibly significant spoiler alert. This book came out in 1965. The first movie was in 84, the TV series Turn of the Millennium. There have been computer games, there have been comics, there have been, probably chicken scratchings on the side of the toilet wall that you've been at some point in your life. But in case you were saving yourself, please subscribe, bookmark, and come back to us after you've seen the movie. Even if you're not saving yourself, you plan on watching the whole thing, do me a favour, hit the subscribe button, drop a little thing on the heart below. It'll make me feel wonderful. I'm going to do a super fast plot summary for Dune. I'm basically going to do it based on the Villeneuve film of 2021. I'm going to miss things. I'm also going to skip over things I just consider aren't that important for anybody that's trying to figure out what the hell is going on, but might be important for people who then come around for that second part of getting into the nuance and really the really interesting stuff that makes up the backdrop of Dune. This isn't a review. I do have a few thoughts I'll share at the end, and they're pretty important ones to me. Hopefully they might be vaguely useful for you. But the reality is I'm not going to go into this as a film review conversation. That being said, get ready, I'm about to kick it off. In 1965, Frank Herbert wrote the first of, I think, 6 or 7 novels, all set in the same universe, that is the universe of Dune. The first novel is called Dune. It is about a planet called Dune, and Dune, the planet, has a lot of sand in it. It is absolutely a significantly obvious metaphor for people going to Middle Eastern countries and exhibiting incredibly amoral and significant national and commercial interest power politics in order to acquire a very, very important source of energy, right? In Dune, it's the spice. In our world, it's the oil. There you go. I said it. Now, in 1984, a movie made by David Lynch, famous, I believe, for things such as Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, and Naked Lunch. He made this movie with the guy from Twin Peaks, and he made the movie with the guy from The Police, I think you may know him as Sting, and the guy from the Starship Enterprise, who you may know as Captain Picard or Patrick Stewart. There are a whole bunch of other famous people in this film. It was quite the epic. A lot of people pan it, a lot of people don't like it because it messes around with the original source material. I personally love it. I mean, there are so many different versions of it on the internet. It is categorically a film of its era, but it's kind of amazing all the same. If you've not seen it, worth watching it. I'm not going to tell you which of the 15 director's cuts to watch, but it's up there with Blade Runner in some ways. Then you have a TV series that showed up in the 2000s on cable in the US. I watched this one pretty religiously as well. Really rather good. They cover a lot more material than either of the Dune films do. They go into more than the first book. They go into probably first, second, and maybe even a bit of the third. Really quite interesting. I think I had about 5 or 6 series of it. It was pretty well done all told. Now, I can't remember any major stars in it, but some pretty good acting all told. It was quite a little bit more soap opera-y than the others, but still a good laugh all round. Then finally, at least for this bit of the introduction, we've got 2021's Dune Part 1 by Denis Villeneuve, as well as a pretty star-studded cast. Javier Bardem, Rebecca Ferguson, that guy from Star Wars, that guy that's Aquaman, the girl that's made a couple of songs and is quite famous, but I think, I can't really tell if she's Miley Cyrus or not, called Zendaya, and Josh Brolin, who I think we all know as Thanos. Here we go. Lady Jessica, a badass spooky witch lady, royally fucks up a millennia-long selective breeding program run by a shady pseudo-religious group, the Bene Gesserit, by having a boy, Paul, with her husband, that guy from Star Wars, Duke Leto Atreides, instead of a girl as she was instructed to by her mentor, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam Influenza. 18 or so years later, The House Atreides, the noble House Atreides, who live on a planet called Caladan and have got some Scottish roots, is given control of the planet Arrakis, a proper little hellhole known colloquially as Dune, or variously as that meth lab of the galaxy, the Middle East metaphor, and various other things ranging around shithole. Paul has an interview with Reverend Mother Influenza, passes, and dreams a lot about a dirty Fremen girl. Not like that. Well, like that. But they then depart from their homeworld of Caladan for Arrakis, which is Dune's proper name. House Harkonnen, who were the previous shitty managers of Arrakis, depart Dune to return to Giedi Prime, but they're not particularly happy about it, probably because it's also a bit of a shithole, and they fuck shit up on the way out, as if they don't care about getting their deposit back. Glossu Rabban, also known as the Beast, also the big dumb one, is proper beefing about it. But his uncle, the Baron, says chill, just float about, it's all cool in the pool. In a surprise to nobody except Duke Leto, who is lawful stupid, the Emperor is a bit of a jackass and he is trying to play off two strong houses, the Harkonnen and the Atreides, against each other to maintain his house's superiority. Aquaman goes to the beach early because he's single and ready to mingle with the Fremen in order to build better relationships with them than the Harkonnen, which is genuinely not difficult. Additionally, Baron Harkonnen makes a deal with Emperor Douchebag IV's advisor, the creepy Reverend Mother Gaius Influenza, to have the Emperor look the other way and provide 3 legions of his shock troopers, the feared Sardaukar, to compensate for Josh Brolin and Aquaman. The floating fat man,
bring in that floating fat man,
has a secret weapon. He's managed to subvert the Duke's personal physician, Dr. Yue, by promising him that he and his wife will be freed together. Yue, who is just a doctor, defeats the guards of the most important sandpit caretaker in the galaxy to turn off the shields, the alarm systems, kick off an attack, paralyze the Duke, and perform a dental operation and help Paul and Jessica escape, all of which basically gets to the point that Dr. Yue makes Asian parents proud. The Harkonnens show up in force, along with some of those aforementioned Sardaukar. They're into blood play and a bunch of other things. They kind of look like nasty Nazi Vikings. And, so Aquaman and Josh Brolin get into a proper fight with them. But they sort of keep coming and it's curtains for House Atreides' new place. Shit gets blown up strong, fam. And then on top of that, Yue, the doctor, delivers Duke Leto to the Baron so they can all have a nice meal together. But he gives the Duke a poisoned tooth so he can kill the bastard. In a surprise to nobody except Dr. Yue, it transpires that Baron Harkonnen's already killed his wife, and then he kills Yue. Duke Leto bites down on the tooth, kills a bunch of Harkonnen, but then misses the Baron as he's floating, isn't he? He's floated up to the ceiling to avoid the gas. Good job, Yue. Good job, Leto. One job to do. The Harkonnen kidnap Jessica and Paul. They're not supposed to kill them because Reverend Mother Gaius Influenza said so, but the floating fat man,
bring in that floating fat man,
found a workaround hidden in the small print. He orders them captured and set free in the desert without any gear but without doing them any harm. Clearly he's never seen Austin Powers because he'd see a 6-year-old child would point out the obvious flaw. Bring me the bodies. Habeas corpus and all that. Paul sees Yue's sign while they're in the transport and uses his voice to get one of the Harkonnen to remove Lady Jessica's gag. She then properly fucks some Harkonnen up and then the plane crashes. Aquaman finds Jessica and Paul and they all flee off together. There's a lot of sand for the next bit, but basically they get discovered. Aquaman kills 19, that's 19 of those aforementioned Sardaukar, because honestly, Jason Momoa is a badass, and then heroically dies not once but twice in the same fight. Leah Kynes maybe, gets killed after giving a speech about how goddamn Fremen she is. I'll talk more about her later, she's actually very important to the actual story, but not in the TLDR. Then, Paul and Jessica escape in a different, smaller transport fly through a storm and end up crashing in the deep desert. They do some walking, using a compass that Paul was given by the now dead Aquaman through dunes and lots of sand. So, they find the Fremen in the middle of the desert, but just before they make it there, it looks like they're going to get eaten by a worm. But a Fremen saves them by using a thumper to distract the worm. That's fine, right? Good. Paul and Jessica aren't really welcomed by the Fremen. They're sort of an enemy, at least an oppressor from like the colonialist Imperium. And even though there's a rumour that Paul is someone special, the voice from the outer world, the Lisan al-Gaib, based on his dismal performance reviews, right now they think he's not the Messiah, he's just a very naughty boy. This includes Chani, the beautiful Fremen woman about whom Paul has been having teenage dreams, who basically think Paul is a spoiled kid who can't chill with the Mandem. And then on top of that, it all kicks off. Jessica's yet again a total fucking badass, holding a knife to Stilgar, the Fremen leader's throat. We've met him before, by the way, in the movie. There was a bit where he showed up and he spat on the ground, did some cool stuff, and he's super important, but not to the TLDR. Also, Javier Bardem, pretty awesome. Stilgar says, cool, yeah, peace, we're friends now, right? All good. And he offers to take them to their underground village people to work out the next steps. Everything's all good, except it's not. One of Stilgar's folks, Jamis, has got a major beef with this, and he calls out Lady Jessica. There's a bit of backwards and forwards, but she's recognised as a badass witch, and so Paul has to fight because she's important now, and Youngblood has to do the right thing. He gets told by Sexy Dream Girl that he's a dead man because Jamis is stone cold, but then he goes on to beat the living shit out of him and regretfully kills him because the Fremen don't believe in personal growth. What can you say? What can you say? And fuck me, that's the end of the film. Thanks for watching the goddamn prequel to the film that you actually wanted to watch for 2 hours and 35 minutes. We'll start the movie in 3 or more years. Maybe. Cool. So what the fuck just happened? Well, I've got some personal thoughts. I avoided all the trailers, promos and otherwise in the hope that this would be a great film. I've looked forward to any form of Dune adaptation. I first heard about this movie 4 maybe or so years ago when it was in pre-production, and I was very, very excited. I basically decided at that point to completely unplug myself out of everything, and so I went to the IMAX with my partner and we sat there watching it, and I was a little surprised when it said part 1 at the beginning, but I was like, fair enough, it's 2, and I looked it up on my phone there and then, which is therefore I am that annoying bloke who takes his phone out and lights it up in the middle of the cinema, but looked it up and it was 2 hours and 35 minutes long, and I thought, well, unless they've done some kind of witchcraft, there's no conceivable way they're going to get the entire of this plot into 2 hours and 35 minutes, so no worries. I then went to the bathroom briefly after the fight with Jamis. I literally, did the usual thing we all do, which is like, oh, okay, need to know, blah, blah, blah. So nipped along, went out, came back in again. And, it was the credits. Because I thought, because I didn't really put it 2 and 2 together. And I thought, well, the fight with Jamis is really the end of the opening act, isn't it? I mean, that's really the point at which all of the pieces that needed to happen to get the preconditions for the actual story, the actual fucking story, well, they've been done now. So, I was a little surprised to come back to the closing credits. Thing is, I liked the movie, but I've read all the books, well, except the ones after his death because, cash grab and I just couldn't be fucked, honestly. But I have read all of his books multiple times, especially God Emperor of Dune, because I genuinely think that's one of the best books that's ever been written. But Dune itself I've read multiple times as well. I watched the 1984 Dune movie by David Lynch multiple times, multiple versions of it multiple times. I could probably quote chunks from it. I watched the 2000 miniseries quite a few times when it was on back in the 2000s. I haven't watched it recently, but I don't know how it holds up, but it was pretty good back then. I watched the documentary on Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a really sort of like incredibly ambitious H.R. Giger and Jodorowsky project in an attempt to bring to life Dune, which never really actually ended up happening, but ended up spawning off a documentary which won the Palme d'Or because it was so interesting. I've read wikis, essays and watched YouTubes about Dune. I'm doing a YouTube video about Dune. I'm the kind of person who should love this film, because honestly, if you've managed to turn me off to this film, you've royally fucked up. But there were times in this movie where I was like, wow, it's a bit slow. What's going on, eh? My partner's thoughts were slightly different. Yeah, it's entertaining, I guess. Lots of weird plot holes, and I didn't really get what was going on with half of it. Like, who are the aliens and why were they in the gloop? Now, if you're watching this, there's a fair chance you're a person that loves Dune, or you care about it, or you enjoy it. And so you're like, what aliens? There are no aliens in Dune. It's all humans. I mean, except maybe the Bene Tleilaxu, but they weren't in this movie. And yes, you are correct. And I obviously had that conversation immediately with her. And then we had a 3-hour further conversation around the history of Dune, starting with the Butlerian Jihad, working its way through the various sort of like migrations of the Zen Sunni who became the Fremen, as well as obviously the manipulations of the Bene Gesserit, the formations of the Mentat, and the Landsrat itself. But all of that nonsense aside, because it was wonderful stuff, and I'm sure she enjoyed every second of it. Well, she was asleep for most of it, I think. But, that's a really, really bad thing for somebody who doesn't understand this film to come into. And I realised a few things. Obviously, there are some wonderful things about this film. I've got to say that the cinematography is really enjoyable. It's updated my mental cinematography for Dune. When I think of what a highliner or a freighter that's the guild spacers are actually using to move these huge houses of the Landsrat from one place to another, the great houses and their armies, I now think of the highliner that's part of the special effects of Dune, the 2021 film. When I think of the majesty of how much water there is on Caladan, again, I think the shots that they took there, the establishing shots and everything else are really quite fantastic. I couldn't tell you that it's any different, honestly, to many of the other craggy cliff faces that are probably shot in, parts of Ireland, northern Wales, or the Orkneys or similar, but still beautiful and quite powerful. Am I going to update my mental imagery of Arrakis itself or the sandworms? I'm not sure. The sandworms themselves, well, fine, yeah, interesting and very, very visually believable, one might say. But I didn't really consider them to be a tour de force that really kind of struck me in any particular way. The Bene Gesserit are significantly less stylistic than they are in the David Lynch version, probably more along the book itself. I thought the Fremen were very well done. The still suits and the style of wearing them was a callback to 84, but also had a certain amount of interesting flair by itself. I thought the Fremen themselves were really nicely done. Javier Bardem as Stilgar was really quite rock solid. I don't understand why everyone's upset about Liet Kynes being a woman, especially being a black woman. I think it's pretty awesome. She did a good job, though. I've got to admit there were points where I was just thinking, well, be that as it may, they could have given her a couple more lines, right? Or at least, kept them in. The same goes for Chani, right? And maybe it's got a bit to do with the fact that as beautiful as Zendaya clearly is, she really needed a few more words, except Chani doesn't get very many words in the overall story as a whole because, well, it was written in 1965. Although Frank Herbert's books are nowhere near as sexist as anybody else, there is still a significant undertone of 1960s white male chauvinism inside it. So I guess you can take that for what it is. I think that Jason Momoa is an incredibly likable screen presence. He is not the Duncan, Idaho I ever imagined, and certainly not like the one in 84, but I don't know if it replaces Duncan in my headcanon, let me put it that way. Star Wars Guy does not replace the actor who I believe was Jürgen Prochnow, but it might have been Max von Sydow. I think it's Jürgen Prochnow in the 1984 film, because, well, he's just Star Wars Guy. And don't get me wrong, that's all well and good, but makes no sense to me. Kyle MacLachlan is still going to be Paul Atreides in my mind. And there's a few other bits and pieces in there. Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica, I think, is a run for the money, and I think may well end up replacing my headcanon as well. She's both strikingly beautiful, and there's no shame in me saying that, as well as does a great job conveying a lot of the spooky weirdness and the conflict that she faces between her duty to the Bene Gesserit, her duty to her husband and the family house, as well as to her son Paul. In fact, she massively outshines Star Wars guy. Having Thanos as Gurney Halleck is, I don't know, I think it's a bit more miss than hit, but, you know, at the end of the day, Josh Brolin is just a very, very enjoyable screen presence. So, you know, Patrick Stewart as Gurney Halleck in the 1984 film is definitely my headcanon. I think it definitely sticks in there. I mean, as much as I really want to say that Josh Brolin's performance was great, and he does have a lot of just screen presence, he's a huge chunk of square-jawed awesome, it's not quite the same as the captain of the USS Enterprise. That being said, you know, Thanos really isn't a bad second stop on that particular performance, especially given that on the whole, he doesn't have a great deal to say. And I do think there's some interesting choices here. Thufir Hawat was interesting. It wasn't bad. Very, very different to David Lynch's one, but I liked the way they characterized the Mentats, the rolling of the eyes, the stain on the lips, though, again, I don't believe they said the Mentats mantra, but at the same point, I still liked it. There was a lot of time given to the Bene Gesserit mantra, I must not fear, fear is the mind killer, fear is the little death that brings total obliteration, I will face my fear, I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing, only I will remain. And I think that was repeated multiple times and done in a really good way. I think the voice was given a half-decent treatment, though not any real difference to the way that it was done in the 84 movie. I do think that there were less liberties taken with the script, though there were a few bits that were missing. There was no sign of Feyd Rautha Harkonnen, who is the other nephew of Baron Harkonnen, and who showed up a lot earlier in both the 84 film and the 2000, and I have a feeling in the book as well. I imagine if there's a part 2, Feyd Rautha will be showing up in it because he's pretty important in it, but, you know, you never actually know the truth of these things. The other things that came to mind, the Shaddam Mapes, the Fremen housekeeper that's really there in order to be able to deliver the crysknife to Lady Jessica. Again, interesting enough that happens, but they didn't really make anything of it. I suspect it's in the cut, right? There are a couple of very, very good sort of metaphorical sequences, the burning of the palm trees, the big action blockbuster sequences, the emergence of the ships from Caladan, the landing of them. I think they were mildly unnecessary. There were some nice sequences when the ship first lands on Caladan with the Guild Navigator and the Emperor's Herald, and the Emperor's Herald comes down the long stairway. You genuinely get a sense of scale, especially when it's brought up to the Highliner, which is an order of magnitude or a few orders of magnitude larger again in size. And you don't need Duke Leto to tell you that you could fit the entire of his freighters and frigates inside one small corner of it. You can see it and you can visualize it, and it's, I think, very, very well done. I think on Arrakis itself, the sand harvesters were interesting, not bad, a bit sort of 1980s feeling to them, and the ornithopters were okay. I think they missed the trick with the ornithopters. There's a lot of verisimilitude in this film in an attempt to make it feel legit. They hit an odd beat here. I think that they could have made them just a little better without losing some of the flavor. There are definitely moments, however, where I was thoroughly enchanted. There's a scene when Paul arrives on Arrakis and is in his quarters. He's basically studying the Fremen, and the hunter-killer drone, the hunter-seeker drone, I believe it's called, comes into his quarters before it's interrupted. And it is an enchanting sequence. There is a bit of quietness to it. There is a mildly ludicrous point where it zooms up to his eyeball, and I've got to admit I kind of was a bit at that, but there were many of those moments of quiet, in essence, that allowed the film to kind of fill in the blanks for you, where you were pausing, allowing the cinematography to breathe, and therefore allowing the plot to breathe. And I have a feeling that the only person in that theatre that enjoyed those moments was me, because I'd had the entire headcanon running all along, going through what the hell was going on and where it was coming up and who was doing what in the parallels of the timelines and where all this stuff was, because I was loving it, and I did love it. And that's the thing. This rant sounds like I didn't love it, but I fucking loved it. I just don't know that many other people did, and it's a real shame, because I do think there's so much that's right about this film. I do think that there's so much they've done to bring what is a incredibly important and well-loved, almost 36-year-old movie and a 55-year-old book, maybe 50-year-old book, into the 2020s. They've missed a couple of tricks. There's a few areas where I think, they need to rethink about the cultural sensitivity side of things. I definitely felt a bit awkward with the fight with Jamis, where the Fremen were the only dark-skinned people on Arrakis, and Paul and Jessica are very, very white. Paul's easy defeat of Jamis is metaphorical and has some troubling colonialist white savior connotation for me. And I obviously knew this was there as a theme in the book all along, but why the fuck did they stop it at this point? That is my frustration. What if they don't make a part 2? What if they're basically going to have a film that's the setup and prequel to all the interesting stuff, that you're not actually going to have the modern interpretation of the movie that we all want. Instead, you're going to have all the stuff that sets it up as a series of tropes, but none of the actual deconstruction that you need to then kind of move through it. Like, I think that Javier Bardem Stilgar was fascinating. I think that the fight with Stilgar has all of the resonance. And you look at, for example, the fight with Jamis. All of the things that Frank Herbert wanted to talk about are captured really well in this movie, but the opportunity is missed to talk about the other things. It would have been interesting to see Paul's journey from white savior to being actually the person that identifies not just with the Fremen, but as Fremen himself, to genuinely adopt the culture, to realize that he is, a Fremen born in an imperial duke's skin. Now, that would have been an interesting conversation. That would have been something to bring up. And they touch on it. You have those immortal words that Leah Kynes speak, right? Which is from the prophecy. I believe it's something along the lines of, and he shall know our ways as if born to them, right? And I think there is a point where these interesting themes kind of get lost, and not just in the fact that in some of the audio they'd get lost anyway. The Hans Zimmer soundtrack is really enjoyable. It's not, I wouldn't say it particularly intrudes, but it definitely fills. And maybe it was just the audio in the cinema where I saw it, but I did find myself losing quite a lot of Paul's words, nearly just because of the fact they were like 4 foot tall bloody Chinese subtitles. I live in Singapore, for those who don't know, and so not that there's anything wrong with subtitles, but really they didn't have to be 4 foot large. A final thing I want to say. Go see it. I mean, it's a Dune movie. If you don't go see it, they won't make a second one. If you don't stick your $15 in the pot, you're not going to see part 2. And I have a genuine feeling, if part 2 gets made, and gets made with the same care and love that part 1 got made with, it's a decent treatment. It's a good treatment. It really is. It requires you to have revised for an exam beforehand, but you'll enjoy it. Okay, on that note, I'm going to do a couple of follow-ups on this if people want me to. The first will be a Dungeons & Dragons homebrew campaigns are fundamentally brilliant if you start them off the way that the movie Dune starts off, and I'll go into that as a bit of a thesis. The second is going to be a bit more of a deep dive into the Dune universe itself, and I'll use that as a bit of a way of bringing out some themes that you could bring into your TTRPG games. If you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of TTRPG games and things like that, and you've never heard from me before and you've never seen anything like that, my name is Ramji and I'm the Dungeon Master and host of a show called The Fourth Culture. We play live stream Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade on the internet. If you have a look down there somewhere, you'll be able to see a whole bunch of videos from us where we do those games. We're probably on, game 50 or so of the D&D campaign, and we're probably on game 4 or 5 of the Vampire game by now. So anyway, why don't you do me a giant favor? Hit follow or subscribe down below, hit the little bell and hit the little heart for me. Give me a like or even a comment. I really appreciate it. I read every single comment and I get sad when people say sad things. And I get really happy when people say happy things. And I kind of get neutral when people say neutral things. And so I'd love it if you actually, gave me some feedback. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like. I liked this movie. I'd like you to watch this movie so they make another one, in the vague hope that at some point we genuinely see a true treatment of Frank Herbert's Dune. All right, my name is Ramji. You can find me on The Fourth Culture. I'll see you soon.